So by now, you've probably already seen, or at least heard, of the release of the film version of In the Heights that came out not too long ago. Based on the stage musical of the same name, In the Heights was originally written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and this is the first film version of the production. Or so we thought. What if I told you that there was another film version of the musical that was released almost a decade prior in 2013? No, I'm not talking about some bootleg recording on YouTube. I'm talking a full-on VHS copy. What? From 2013? That can't be right. Hold on. Okay, so it's not an official film, but a high school production of it. But hey, it came before the 2021 film. Maybe it'll be just as good.
I am Usnavi. You probably never heard my name. Reports of my fame are greatly exaggerated. Yo, with 96,000, I finally finished housing for the barrio using the wireless web browser.
Or not. Folks, I'm gonna ask a simple question here. How tone-deaf do you have to be to take a musical about gentrification and race issues and gentrify it with a dominantly white cast? If your answer is anything other than very, there's the door. You may have seen clips going around on TikTok by now of a few less than stellar performances of In the Heights by very Caucasian schools. After seeing these, I had to go looking further into it, which brought me to probably the worst of the productions that I've seen posted on the site. It doesn't mean that there aren't worse out there, I just couldn't find them, which I'm kinda thankful for. Now, I'm not one to gatekeep performances and what productions schools choose to put on, but there's a pretty clear issue here. In the Heights centers around a primarily Latino cast that comes from all different walks of life and countries. Part of what makes the show so interesting is the cultural elements that are brought into not only the music, but the dialogue, setting, costumes, and choreography. It's a celebration of the heritage and gives those who aren't familiar with the cultures a look into what life is like for a select few. Obviously, there are issues with being able to represent everyone within the community, such as we saw with the issue of the absence of a stronger Afro-Latino presence in the recent film. But in comparison to what some of these schools have done, oh boy, the film is still leagues ahead. It's understandable that different cultures can be attracted to folks outside of them, and being able to experience it firsthand is an amazing thing. The issue arises when the culture isn't being represented by the proper people. When you get a school that's majority white to act in a role that is written strictly as a person of Latino heritage, it feels off. But I'm sure I've horribly explained this issue, as I'm not all too familiar with it firsthand, because I'm, well, you know. Besides, we're getting off topic. There's a reason why this performance has been getting a lot of flack, because not only is it a predominantly white cast, but they're not really the greatest performers. Now, this shouldn't be taken as bullying. I'm trying to provide a legitimate criticism for something that could have the potential to be improved. I understand that these are only high schoolers, but that doesn't put them above criticism. Also, if you're not familiar with at least the general plot of the show, you may be a bit lost, but I'll try my best to at least explain the basics of the characters. Of course, dissecting a production as a whole can be complex, so we're gonna break this down into a few parts. This is something a bit new for the channel, but if you find it interesting and want more stuff like this, why not hit subscribe and leave a like? Alrighty, up first,
In Washington Heights.
like any good show, the characters drive the story along. Their energy and acting is what engages the audience and holds their attention. So what are you supposed to do when half your characters don't even seem interested in being there?
I am Usnavi.
Usnavi is a character that is very complex and very simple at the same time. The main character of In the Heights, Usnavi dreams of returning to run his father's former business in the Dominican Republic while struggling to make ends meet with his bodega. He's a lovable, dedicated worker, but he's also a huge dork, and that's a large part of his character. The Usnavi in this production is certainly dressed like what you may be familiar with, but something tells me that this kid probably thinks the Dominican Republic is a type of coffee blend. He's not particularly awkward in a nerdy sense, but plain awkward. His stage presence makes it feel like he has no interest in being present and is fed up with it, reciting lines like he's in a situation where he's had to repeat the same thing to his friend 5 times before they finally heard him.
Next up to bat for Rosarios, they run the cab company, they struggle in the barrio. See, their daughter Nina's off of college tuition is mad steep, so they can't sleep. Everything they get is mad cheap.
When he's not clearly just speaking his lines, you can sense a lack of confidence, especially during songs where his lyrics will trail off at the end of sentences. He has no energy, no emoting aside from slight inflections in his voice and minor movements. I understand how nerve-wracking performing on a stage in front of people can be, but it's your job to try and hide that to the best of your ability. And when he does try to put emphasis on lines and words, it just ends up sounding goofy. One major issue that's not only present for Usnavi, but a lot of the male cast is that they're either unable to or not confident in their singing abilities. Usnavi doesn't hit his response to the call and response part during the opening number. And most other parts that would have him singing with someone else are omitted entirely. He has a few lines during songs like It Won't Be Long Now where he does sing, but this is again done in a severely unconfident hushed tone. The first lines of the opening song are an indication of how the rest of his performance will play out, as halfway through the intro, he goes off beat and doesn't try to remedy this issue at all. He doesn't feel like he's trying to rap, but merely reciting lines that he memorized that happen to be accompanied by a beat.
Oye, mira, güero, ¿cómo está?
After the first few lines Usnavi has, he comes. The bane of my existence. Piragüero. Or, what I mean to say is, this Piragüero. The Piragüero isn't a main character per se, but he's still a beloved part of the show, and kinda completes the whole tone. All he wants to do is make a living in the barrio selling piragua while competing with the neighborhood ice cream trucks. So, why do I dislike the performer so much? Well, he kinda reminds me of a certain type of theater kid. One that I try desperately not to be. You know, the kind who over-exaggerates all his movements, does funny voices, and thinks he's the funniest shit ever. He's clearly trying to make the most of the little stage time that he does have, while also being the first offender of putting on an accent. Now, yes, a lot of the characters do have accents in other versions of the musical, as, you know, that's part of their heritage. But in those cases, they aren't usually played by white men putting on horrible Hispanic accents. While his delivery may be iffy, at least he knows his time is limited and tries to shuffle off as soon as possible. The Piragüero is one of the few male cast members who does sing here. He doesn't do a terrible job, but he shifts the notes down at least a good 2 octaves. But here's the thing, though. I think that he would have been very capable of hitting those notes at a higher range. Listen to his delivery on one line in Piragua in particular.
It's hotter than the islands are tonight.
Like, hot damn, dude, that was pretty good. But then he immediately shifts back down. He definitely has potential.
That was Abuela. She's not really my Abuela.
Enter the second contender for the worst type of theater kid, playing Abuela Claudia, the neighborhood matriarch who takes joy from the simple things in life. This is the type of kid who thinks their performance is the greatest feat of acting the crowd has ever seen. Because of this, they ham it up, and you can feel their undeserved confidence flow out into their acting, transforming it into arrogance at some point in the process.
Abuela, ¿we any milk at home?
No, ¿qué pasó?
It's my fridge. I got café, but no con leche.
Try my mother's old recipe. 1 can of condensed milk.
Nice. Use your lottery ticket.
Ay, paciencia, hice.
Abuela is an old woman, an experienced lady who lives her life by the motto of patience and faith. This Abuela feels like a 30-year-old desperate housewife. I don't want to compare too much to the originals, but just take a look at Olga Meredith during Paciencia y Fe.
Sharing double beds, trying to catch a break, struggling with English. Yes, Sydney, two friends finally got a job working as a maid. So we cleaned some homes, polishing with pride, scrubbing the whole of the Upper East Side.
And now, look at this version.
Double beds, trying to catch a break, struggling with English. Listening to friends, finally got a job working as a maid. So we cleaned some homes, polishing with pride, scrubbing the whole of the Upper East Side.
There's no desperation, there's no internal conflict, regret, anything pertaining to what Abuela is singing about in the moment. The actor's treating the song like it's her version of On My Own from Les Mis. It's not supposed to sound empowering and like a confident song. It's a song about the troubles of life and what Abuela has gone through and thinking about what she'll do with the winning lottery ticket. It may seem unfair to be comparing these kids to professional actors, but when they exude this much cockiness and arrogance, someone has to put them in their place.
Next up to bat, the Rosario.
A married couple who runs a taxi dispatch service in Washington Heights who are struggling to make ends meet while paying for their daughter's college tuition. This version of Mr. Rosario, much like Usnavi, doesn't seem to be invested too much in being in the performance. There's honestly not much to criticize, not because he doesn't have any flaws, but because he just doesn't try. Again, he barely emotes and his singing is nothing more really than slight vocal inflections and hushed tones. Mrs. Rosario, on the other hand, well, the actor actually isn't too bad. It seems like she has good vocal control and projection, being one of the only people in the entire production who can be heard clear as day.
Don't mind him, he's all excited, 'cause the enough flew in at 3 a.m. last night. Look at me, this one's been cooking all week. Usnavi, come over for dinner, there's plenty to eat.
Her inflections and enunciations are precise without feeling forced, and she's clearly trying to get other characters to match her energy level. She also has a pretty decent stage presence, making sure to cheat out to the audience and ensuring her face is visible during dialogue. Her movements and body language also just feel more natural and comfortable rather than forced exaggeration like Piragüero and Abuela demonstrated. Overall, probably one of, if not the best performer in the entire show. I do hope that she went on to do more, just, you know, in a role right for her.
The salon ladies.
Thanks, Usnavi.
Daniela and Carla, the Salon Ladies. Two unfortunately sideline casualties of the original. A duo of gossips that runs Daniela's salon, which is moving locations downtown. It's hard to dedicate a lot of time to every character, but these two always felt like they deserved more time in the spotlight. Fortunately for us, though, what would otherwise be a flaw of the original script works in our favor as we don't have to sit through much of this version of the duo. Much like Abuela's actor, you can feel the overconfidence just oozing out of Daniela like she's the hottest shit to grace the stage. Mind you, this unearned swagger is all being absorbed as she walks onto stage for the first time singing out of key. And when I say singing, I mean she's just kinda yelling her lines while the pianist plays notes to keep her on key. She's quite often offbeat as well, more so than any other cast member, making the pauses that either she or the instrumentals take for the other to catch up pretty noticeable. It kind of begs the question, why didn't they just recast her? Or, you know, not do the musical at all? She's also one of the other actors that forces an accent when speaking Spanish. Now, there's a difference between forcing an accent when speaking a different language and simply pronouncing words correctly. When forcing an accent, it's something that's pretty easy to tell, usually indicated by over-enunciated stressors for certain words. Simply pronouncing the words correctly can be a bit harder to discern sometimes, as beginner speakers usually revert to forcing an accent, with the words becoming more natural to speak over time. However, it's hard to justify anything when not only is she forcing an accent, but desperately mispronouncing a lot of the words.
Let's have a carnival del barrio. Huepa!
Carla, well, there's not a lot to say about her as she gets even less time than Daniela.
Oh, my mom is Dominican Cuban. My dad is from Chile, and you're with me. I'm Chile, Dominican Rican. What? But I say
Her actress seems to be more competent when it comes to singing, mind you, still not amazing, but there's potential there that's definitely hindered as a lot of her songs are paired with and drowned out by her counterpart.
Sonny, you're late.
Usnavi's scrappy younger cousin who helps run the bodega. Sonny is one of the fan favorites of the show, but this isn't Sonny. This is Manny. One of Sonny's main traits is that he's younger, visibly so, than his cousin. Here though, Usnavi looks years younger than Sonny, which makes the rest of their dynamic incredibly hard to sit through, as Usnavi talks down to this child man.
I'll be on platter of cone with the rum and coke. Sonny can stay here and sell Twinkies.
Sell? I'll give them away for free. The Robin Hood of El Barrio.
And again, it just feels super awkward when he speaks normal lines.
Now, let's talk about that raise. 3 sodas or I walk.
Half price, diet cola champagne. That's my final offer.
Ain't no Dominicans be drinking no diet soda.
The one good thing I can say about Sonny here is that, while he's not great at hitting his notes like the rest of the male cast, at the very least he gives it his all and doesn't sound ashamed of it like his cousin.
You ain't got no skills, Benny. Don't let me get a Milky Way.
I will say this for Benny. While strong probably isn't the right word, his initial introduction is the most competent of the group. Benny's one of Usnavi's childhood friends who works at the Rosario's dispatch with dreams of becoming a big-shot businessman. He comes in as the character rather than feeling like someone just playing the character.
You ain't got no skills, Sonny. Let me get a Milky Way. Yeah. Let me just get a daily news and the post and the most important my 5 second copy, 1 cream, 5 sugar.
He has, albeit very little, attitude that matches with his tone of voice. Yet, that's only in the opening number. For the rest of his time in the show, Benny falters just like his friends.
Getting fired, killing the mood. So much to thank after 5 long years. She is finally getting Vanessa that fix your collar. Holla, doing shots on the weekend as long as you buy them. L'chaim.
To make matters worse, he's one of the only main male cast members who has more than one song that requires singing. If given a bit more time and proper training or guidance, I think he might have been able to pull off these songs.
The streets a little kind of young. Now can't you see that the day seems clear? Now you are here opposite me. Maybe it's just me.
But as is, you can hear that he's clearly straining his voice to project and reach higher notes. When he's not straining, he has to abruptly slip in and out of falsetto in order to get notes that would quite seemingly be in his range with some more practice.
Hold your horse. She's smiling, say love.
He's very visually conscious of his struggling as well, which affects his demeanor on stage. This issue is exaggerated more during his duets with Nina, where both actors are guilty of similar vocal techniques. This next thing, while this isn't a flaw of the performer per se, it's, well, you'll see. One of the conflicts of In the Heights is that Mr. Rosario doesn't see Benny as part of the family because he's not Latino, insulting him for not being able to speak Spanish or understand struggles that they go through. In the original script, Benny's race is never specified, so the role is more flexible within the casting, and there have been several productions who have cast white men in the roles. However, none of that quite works in this case because Benny and Mr. Rosario look exactly the same.
Yo, Vanessa, show up yet?
In rankings of best performers, Vanessa would probably take second place under Mrs. Rosario. It's good to see at least one of the main roles has someone with decent vocal control cast. Even in the original, Vanessa kinda lacks any character outside of being Usnavi's love interest, but her passion and ambition is usually enough to drive the performer. Vanessa isn't perfect by any means, but she definitely stands out above the rest of them. She's usually able to carry the tune of her song and hit higher notes without straining, something that would otherwise be detrimental given her number of solos and songs.
As I sweep the curb, I can hear those turbo engines blazing a trail through the sky. I look up and think about the years gone by. One day I'm walking to JFK and I'm gonna fly.
She's also most consistent with holding notes and not wavering or needing to shift tones halfway to conserve air. There are moments here and there where she slips up or occasionally hits a note lower than it should be, but that's minor when looking at the production as a whole. The main part where she struggles is outside of songs. You get the feeling that she wants to be like Mrs. Rosario, where she develops an energy and chemistry with other characters, but that's stilted by her just feeling uncomfortable in dialogue.
So West Village, will you bottle of champagne?
No, the landlord saw my credit application and laughed. Out loud.
Screw him. It wasn't the right place for you.
No, there was exposed brick on the walls on purpose, not just because the walls were all busted.
And I don't know if it's just me or because the band lacks energy, but some of the time signatures on her songs feel a lot slower than they should be. It's probably something that could be chalked up to the band though, rather than the performer, as when I compared versions, it seemed as if she was quite on beat. Not amazing, but certainly not terrible either.
So Nina, I hear you've been talking to Benny.
Daughter of the Rosarios, Nina is the last main cast member who we meet in the barrio as she returns from her first year out at Stanford University. Another competent singer, Nina got the short end of the stick by having to pair with most of the rest of the cast for her songs except Breathe. While not excellent, she has a voice that can certainly project and be loud when she tries, and her vowel projection especially carries sound. All of her notes seem to be on key, or at least didn't stand out as being too different. The biggest issue she faces, like I said, is matched by her love interest. Both Nina and Benny slip into falsettos during their higher notes. The difference between the two, though, is while Benny may not be able to hit those notes otherwise, I feel pretty confident in saying that Nina would have been able to. And that's one of the biggest things that can take you out from an otherwise decent performance, seeing the actors slip into a form that you know they shouldn't need to. There are points during certain songs where she'll slip in and out of falsetto during a single word, which certainly doesn't need to be done. Just like with everyone else I was slightly impressed by, with a bit more training and practice on those notes, I know she could reach them without straining. Nina also has a lot of downtime during more serious moments of the performance where she has a chance to better emote and express herself, which you can tell that she's more than capable of. Again though, this is hindered by her pairing with the unconfident Benny, whose choreography primarily consists of him standing in one place and swinging his arms slightly while staring at Nina, limiting her range of movement.
In the heights, I flip the lights and start my day.
I genuinely don't have much to say about the ensemble because there's only like 5 or 6 of them that aren't played by the main cast members. Because of that, the singing meshes together with the main cast, who are either significantly louder than the rest of the ensemble, or they all sound so alike that it doesn't matter. What I can tell you, though, is that the ladies' half of the crew sounds and stays a lot more on key than their male counterparts. That isn't saying much, though, as the male part is comprised of 2 non-leads, and since we know the state of the male lead singing capabilities, it certainly explains the lack of consistency in key and volume. Genuinely, when the guys are together, it doesn't sound like singing as much as it does them yelling their lines. The first and possibly biggest issue we can see with the set design during the opening as Graffiti Pete does his Dream Ballet is that the stage seems to have very limited space. And what little space there was is now taken up largely by the set pieces for Rosario's Usnavi's Bodega and Daniela's Salon. Musicals are performances that usually require large amounts of room in order to have more intricate choreography and movement on stage. There are musicals, though, that take place in more limited spaces, but they have to make compromises when it comes to set pieces in order to keep the energy and movement going. Probably one of the most well-known tight space musicals I can think of is Star Kid's Trail to Oregon. The entire musical takes place on a less than spacious stage, and in order to allow for free movement, there are very few props used aside from a door, a wagon, and some chairs that are moved off stage when not being used. Giving your audience the benefit of the doubt and just allowing them to visualize the full setting in the mind is a lot more acceptable than you might think. Just because theater is a visual medium doesn't mean that everything has to be represented visually, especially on a tight budget. But then you also run into the empty stage issue, where all your characters are clumped together at center stage, and it's hard to ignore how empty the rest of the stage is. This is where the advantage of movement comes in, especially group choreography. Looking again at Trail to Oregon, the cast manages to incorporate some fairly decent group choreography because they take advantage of their range of movement, taking up what space would otherwise be empty. Back in our production of In the Whites, however, even when it's just 2 or 3 characters on stage, they clump together and usually refrain from any sort of choreography or wide-range movement that can keep attention. The worst example of this is during a lot of Benny and Nina scenes, where the actors mainly just stick together, hold hands, and look into each other's eyes while they sing. There's no issue in putting on shows in smaller spaces, but it's a lot more difficult to have the space and choreography complement one another. I've had to block out and choreograph shows from scratch, and I'm sure you can guess, it's not an easy feat to do, especially with plenty of space. The set design as a whole isn't too bad, but it just fills the bare minimum. Again, a smaller minimalist design can be made interesting, but I've already harped on that point. Rosario's, the bodega, and the salon are built to host no more than 1 or 2 people. Because of that, the actors are pushed out into the center of the stage in order to more freely move around. Breaking out into the center stage is also common and normal for a lot of performances, but with such a small stage and characters that are supposed to stay in one location that end up moving back and forth, it becomes hard to keep track of what center stage is supposed to represent. If that's hard to understand, just take a look at this. During the opening number, after Benny gets his stuff from the bodega, he walks through the 4th wall of the store and reaches into Rosario's, setting his stuff down on the desk before moving back to center stage. This makes it super unclear as to where exactly he's supposed to be. Unless Benny's a ghost or a superhuman, I don't think you should be able to do that. The choreography is lackluster, to say the least. Barring the issue of the stage size for a second, the dancing just isn't, well, it just isn't. A lot, again, is the bare minimum that they had to do in order to fill time and space. Being trained to dance is, in my opinion, a lot more difficult and time-consuming than singing, but it's quite clear that these actors didn't spend much time on the dancing in general either. It's hard to describe the difference between a novice and a professional or practiced dancer, but when looking at them from a visual standpoint, it's usually pretty obvious. There's just something about the movement of the two that feels different. Complex choreography isn't necessary, but it really helps engage the audience when you have some bit of visual stimulation outside of the actors standing around and talking. All the choreography and dance that happens either lacks energy or suffers from cast and stage size. For the Carnival, it's kinda hard to have a big song and dance number with all the cast members on stage throwing an impromptu party where there's barely even enough room to make a conga line. In their defense, I can't think of any conceivable compromises they could have made to better the scene. If they chose to cut out parts of the ensemble, that would negate the feeling of the community coming together, and if they limited the choreography even more, that would have removed what little energy there was to begin with. When planning a show, you can't just pick a play or musical at random based on interest and plan on performing it with what you have. You have to think about this kind of stuff and take it into consideration when planning before making a final decision, or change course to pick another more suitable show completely. And in this case, that's nothing more than another marcus towards why they shouldn't have picked this show! One of the only decent dancers is Graffiti Pete, but even that ain't saying much. The bigger, more important dance numbers are painfully awkward as you're watching more than one bad dancer at a time. For the In the Club number, everyone's doing little more than a 2-step, square dancing or modified ballroom dancing. The club number is arguably the most important piece of choreography in the show as it carries the plot and energy, conveying the plot beats through dance instead of just song. But here, it just feels like you're watching a middle school dance. It's not fast-paced, it doesn't make use of the space, and it doesn't do a good job carrying the story. Weirdly, the blackout after the club is probably the best scene in the entire show, but it's really not saying much still. Well, at least it's decent up until Usnavi, Benny, and Sunny have to start singing. And realistically, I probably only like this part more because you can't really see the choreography. But I've ragged on the choreography for long enough now. Back to the set design and environment for a bit, there are some things done decently. During the blackout, they make use of the backdrop to project the image of the fireworks rather than depending on lighting rigs and gels to replicate the colors. Now, the use of a lighting rig to pull off the fireworks can be done, but with the technical prowess we've seen so far, I think it was the right call for them to go with a different, easier method. I talked about how cramped the 3 shops were before, but I didn't really explain how cramped they truly are. In order to even move in the bodega, Usnavi and Sunny have to push the counter out into the street to fit in. It's even worse when they have to try and open the fridge. It's the same thing with Rosario's in the salon. Both the single salon chair and the dispatch desk have to be pushed into the center stage for characters to interact with or fit into the actual interior of the set piece. Lastly, and probably the most important piece of set design, the mural of Abuela Claudia. Like, the mural of Abuela is meant to be what gets Usnavi to stay in the barrio. If I saw that face semi-permanently attached to my store, that would be even more motivation to get the hell out of Dodge. It doesn't even look close to resembling this Abuela's actor.
So the hot club in Washington Heights, you might be right, this music's tight.
Without musical talent, putting on a musical is pretty moot. We've already gone over the character performances and singing skills, so it's time to look at the backbone of any musical, the orchestra. An orchestra can make or break the entire production as the pacing and tone are carried by the instrumentals. If your performance is accompanied by an off-tempo or off-time band, the entire thing can fall apart as a result. The band isn't just responsible for music during songs, but musical cues for plot beats that have to be pulled off at proper times. I went into this trying to give the orchestra the benefit of the doubt, as it didn't begin terribly, a little lacking in energy, but mainly on beat and in tune. It wasn't until halfway through the opening number where I picked up on one thing the band was doing that truly indicated the musical ability of the actors. Many of the characters' vocals are backed up by piano, meaning that there's two competing melodies of the same tune going head to head. Piano backing on vocals isn't a bad thing, and is quite normal in some shows. But it's clear that here, it was being used as a crutch to help the actors find their notes. This hurts the song in the long run because, despite trying to help characters find their notes, the actors tend to remain off-key, meaning that they're not even harmonizing with the backing piano. Needless to say, this is something that was added exclusively in this production. Listening to any other recording, whether amateur or professional, I wasn't able to detect the piano backing other than what was already written into the songs. One thing I wish we could see in the recording is the size of the orchestra. It sounds like it's fairly small, probably mirroring the size of the onstage, talent. And this is probably why all the music lacks energy. I talked about something else slightly when covering Vanessa, but upon closer inspection, I found it happening a lot more than I initially suspected. Like her section for In the Heights, where it felt slower paced than normal, a lot of the other songs feel slower than they should be. It's such an odd thing because when comparing it to other recordings and versions, they mostly match up in BPM and tempo. But when listening to the isolated versions of this, it feels like they drag on for longer. Aside from In the Heights, Benny's Dispatch No Me Diga and Paciencia y Fe seem to carry this vibe more than other songs. It may be the performers being just slightly off time from the band, but I sincerely can't tell. Speaking of off time, the orchestra is guilty of missing their cues quite a few times. Most of them were relatively inconspicuous, but there's one pause at the beginning of No Me Diga where the band just straight up doesn't start playing after Daniela's line. This screws over the poor actor who's forced to try and take up time by improvising a line, which, if you have any experience in amateur theater, you can clearly tell she's doing so.
Oh, don't make my hair all crunchy.
You need extra turtle into your life.
Oh.
Goodness, girl, you really need a makeover. You can tell you've been gone for a year. I know!
The sudden directional stop of the sentence into a different sentence with the exasperated sigh, the is an indicator of that to me. Because I would have done the same exact thing in high school. And this isn't her fault. I checked the official script and recordings, and they all have the song start after Daniela's last line about hair gel, meaning that this one was solely on the orchestra. The true musical capacity of both the band and actors can be seen, though, in bigger ensemble songs. There are a few sections in the recording where the scene's cut or fades in and out to jump forward a few seconds, usually over minor dialogue. But there are some parts where they do it during songs, which I'm not sure why they did. That part could be blamed on the videographer. What can't be blamed on the recording is them cutting out whole parts of certain songs outside of the edit. There are smaller things, like not including Usnavi's singing lines in the opening, but for others like Carnaval del Barrio, they're completely butchered. There are whole sections cut out, like Piraguero's Bridge and the crowd cheering on Benny and Nina. The exclusions remove nearly a minute of the song and are jarring to listen to as there are clearly sections missing. You may think I've been too harsh, or harping on these poor kids for too long. And truly, I could see that. But this criticism comes from a place of understanding, of knowledge and caring for the art. I criticize because I know so much better could have been done by these kids with more time and practice. And don't think that because I'm treating this as a legit performance doesn't mean I don't think it was an appropriate show for them to do. I still think it was, and is, wildly inappropriate for this kind of, for a lack of a better term, whitewashing to happen. But I have to concede, picking any other show probably wouldn't have improved the quality of the performances without more time and dedication. It just so happens that this particular script managed to highlight the faults of the production cast and crew more than another, more suitable one may have. Art is important, but it's also important to let people express themselves through the art they feel represents them, rather than doing it for them. And I'm not saying you can't enjoy the art at all. It's perfectly fine to sing or dance along. Enjoy it. It's meant to be enjoyed. Just don't let your enjoyment for it become something that silences others. If you truly enjoy it so much, be willing to help lift those up that it celebrates and let them use their voices too. Musicals are something that can bring people together under the shared loves of music, dance, and theater. Don't forget how important sharing a passion can truly be.